Hey everyone, Chunji here, and I finally have a guide for turn 5 of the Binding Coil of Bahamut. Now this turn is definitely the hardest raiding content in this game currently, and you should go in realizing you will not one-shot this place, even with a guide showing you the way. Unless this isn't your first time here and you fought this boss multiple times already. This turn is all about team precision, and without exact timing and coordination, you're going to wipe more than once attempting to kill this boss. Now, this turn is purely a boss fight, which consists of 5 phases. Each phase having its own mechanic that will test everything from how well you dodge to how fast you're able to output ridiculous amounts of DPS in a short amount of time. Not only that, but if you're unable to rotate your cooldowns as a tank, you won't even be able to get out of phase 1 of this encounter. Now, let's break down the phases, and I'll explain how you handle each mechanic as we go. So phase 1 starts out with 4 enemies. 3 of these enemies are small dragons that are known as the Scourge of Mercadia. And the last enemy is Twintania, who is the actual boss of this encounter. What you're going to want to do is have your off-tank be the one who starts this pull. As he goes in, he will use his AoE threat skills, whether it's Flash, Steel Cyclone, or Circle of Scorn, to gain aggro on all 3 of these Scourge at the same time. Seconds after the off-tank runs in, the main tank will follow close behind him to provoke Twintania and tank her away from the raid. You're either going to want to tank Twintania facing away from the raid, or you're going to need to pull the Scourge far enough away so that Twintania does not hit the raid with her frontal cone attack. Now, generally during this pull, you will have your Scholar healing the off-tank, as well as the raid, and your White Mage healing the main tank, though if the Scholar can throw a couple heals onto the main tank, he should do so. Now once you have Twintania and the Scourge split up, the raid's first objective is to kill the 3 Scourge. These enemies have a moderate health pool and shouldn't take more than 15 seconds to kill. Their basic attacks will hit your tank for approximately 600 damage, and anyone else in the raid for 1000 or more. Though this is not the biggest problem when it comes to fighting these enemies. In fact, they use a powerful skill known as Liquid Hell. This skill is channeled by one of the 3 Scourge and will land on a random player around the map. This includes your tank and your off-tank. Once the skill begins to cast, the area in which the Scourge chose will be invisible but static, meaning if you are continuously moving while it's being cast and never return to the same area, you should be able to avoid being hit by it. However, once the skill lands, it will leave a circle of fire similar to the Void Zone in turn 2, but its damage is a lot higher. This skill has an initial damage of approximately 900 and a continuous damage of 1500 every second if you stand within this circle. Liquid Hell cannot be silenced or stunned, so don't even worry about trying to CC it while it's being cast. Once the Scourge have all been defeated, you will no longer need to worry about Liquid Hells in this phase. Now you'll have to start the real battle versus Twintania. Thankfully, Twintania only has a few skills you'll have to worry about until phase 2, the first being Plummet. This is a frontal AoE attack that hits for approximately 2000 to 3000 on anyone caught in front of her. This skill is very noticeable because it looks like she's body slamming the main tank. Now, for my raid, we have a huge issue building our limit break because our DPS is too high. Your limit break will be extremely important in the phases to come, so take this opportunity to build it just past 1 bar by having everyone in the raid, except for the healers, stand in front of Twintania and get hit by the plummets. Our White Mage will continuously cast Medica 2 and 3, and our Scholar will make sure everyone has Succor so that no one dies. However, this strategy may not work for every group due to the difference in gear and health pools, so just use your best judgment if you choose to attempt this limit breaking build strat. The next skill Twintania uses is Death Sentence. This is Twintania's hardest hitting skill, and in later phases will hit anywhere from 7 to 9000 damage unmitigated. Though in this first phase, it won't hit you for nearly that hard. The average damage seen by this skill in phase 1 is between 2.5k and 3k. Twintania will also auto-attack the tank every now and then and can, I repeat, can instantly auto-attack after a plummet or death sentence, so be sure you're extremely aware of what skills are being cast and to preemptively begin your heal so that your tank is not one-shot by this unfortunate mechanic. These skills will repeat until you get Twintania to approximately 85%. At 85%, a piece of her collar will break off and create a black area beneath her, known as a Neuralink. If stood in, it will give you a debuff for as long as you stand in it. Don't worry about this Neuralink for now, but remember it because it will become extremely important in the future phases. Right after a piece of this collar breaks off and this zone is created, make sure your group is split into 2 teams of 4, one on her back left and one on her back right. The reason for this is because shortly after, Twintania will mark an individual with a red triangle, excluding the person tanking Twintania, and 4 seconds later she will turn and cast a fireball directly on the target. This fireball will hit that single player for 13 to 15,000 damage. To reduce this damage, you will need to stack on top of other players, which will cause the fireball's damage to be split between all targets. For every player hit by fireball, Twintania will gain 1 stack of wax and flesh. Now, it really doesn't matter how you decide to split your group up to do these stacks, but I suggest having at least 1 healer in each group of 4. This just makes healing easier for the group as a whole. Also, do not forget that the Scholar's Pet and the Summoner's Pet count in these stacks. Meaning, if you have a Scholar and a Summoner in the same stack along with another DPS, and their pets get too close when the fireball goes off, this stack is not a 3-man stack anymore, but a 5-man stack. The number of people you have in each stack is extremely important for the next phase, and if done improperly or with too many people, you will cause the raid to wipe, so be very aware of your positioning for this entire fight. I suggest that you decide who is on each side of Twintania and in which stack they're on before you even begin this phase, so you're not frantically deciding mid-battle. Now, once this Neuralink drops and Twintania casts her first fireball, phase 2 will begin. The tank is going to want to move to his next position at this time, as you can see my tank doing now. Phase 2 will introduce 3 new mechanics, the first one being a new tank debuff called Infirmity, which will greatly reduce healing the target receives for the duration. This debuff cannot be Asuned or leeched off the target. This debuff will always be applied with Death Sentence from this point on, which will make healing the target very difficult. Also, something to note is that every time Twintania casts Death Sentence from this phase forward, its damage potency will increase up to a cap. Meaning, with every new Death Sentence in that phase, Death Sentence will hit harder and harder. This potency resets when a new phase begins or if someone dies. Now, there are 2 ways you can deal with this Infirmity. The way my raid deals with it is by healing through it and having our tank rotate cooldown so he is not one-shot. But the other way is to have tanks swap every time Death Sentence is used. This can be a pain and very dangerous if you get unlucky and the off tank is marked with a fireball or conflagration after a Death Sentence is used. Which brings me to my next new mechanic, Conflagration. Similar to a fireball, this ability places an indicator above a random person's head and seconds later the ability activates. This is a blue and black circular indicator as seen here. Though unlike fireballs, you want to do the exact opposite, and instead of stacking with a group, you will seclude yourself directly under Twintania, and once the skill activates, a fiery dome will appear that is about the size of Twintania's target indicator below her. The individual who has the target of this skill will become stunned and will be unable to perform any actions. Anyone else caught inside the dome will also be stunned the same way. While inside, that player will take approximately 300 damage every 3 seconds. Also, players who are too close to the outer edge will take the same amount of damage but not receive the stun effect. If the player targeted by Conflag dies while inside the dome or specific time elapses before it is killed, it will explode, dealing approximately 9,000 damage and killing everyone inside, as well as those sitting too close to the Conflag. You will know you're staying too close if you're taking continuous fire damage from it. The way Conflag timer is determined is by the number of wax and flesh stacks Twintania has. Conflag will last 15 seconds with 4 stacks and 20 seconds with 3 stacks. As stated before, Twintania gains these stacks by hitting players with the fireball. Each player counts as 1 stack of wax and flesh. However, while Conflag is active, you can reset its timer by running into its center with a fireball indicator above your head. Though something to note is that you will not always have a fireball indicator when a Conflag is active, so don't rely on this. In fact, you will generally only get a fireball every 1st, 3rd, and 5th Conflag. That means you will need to kill between 2 and 3 Conflags without fireball's help. Conflag can actually be a great defensive tool for your raid as well. If you do not want to worry about healing your tank while this ability is active, they can simply walk into Conflag. While inside, Twintania will be unable to damage them, but the tank will not be able to use any skills or take any actions, so be very careful if you choose this path. These mechanics will repeat until you get Twintania to approximately 55% HP, where her collar will break once again, leaving a Neuralink behind. She will then shoot high into the air and become untargetable, and this is where phase 3 begins. Immediately as you see your collar break, you will need to run down into this little pocket, as you see my group doing here. This is probably the second hardest mechanic of this entire fight, so pay very close attention to what I'm about to tell you. During phase 3, Twintania will begin to dive bomb you. These dive bombs will hit you to critical life and throw you across the map. This generally ends in you hitting the fiery wall and being instantly killed. The way you deal with her dive bombs is by grouping up in this pocket as close together as possible. After a few seconds, Twintania will mark a random raid member with a green and black indicator which will lock onto their current location. This indicator will also give off a dinging sound when applied, so pay attention. As soon as you see this marker, your entire raid will need to move as quickly as possible up to the top of this hill and then begin to move back down immediately. Twintania will dive bomb you 3 times before she stops, and then 3 snakes will appear on the west side of the arena. There will be 2 smaller ones on the left and right called Hygeia, and 1 larger one in the middle called Asclepius, who is the mini-boss of this phase. These snakes have no cleave, so having them face the raid is completely fine, but they do use a single target ability called Wild Rattle, which does moderate damage to its target. Asclepius has a ridiculous high health pool and would not be killable without this next mechanic. The Hygeia snakes, when killed, will cause a small explosion doing no damage but placing a debuff on all enemies and allies nearby called Disseminate. This debuff will increase damage received by 25% for 40 seconds. Every time a Hygeia is killed near a target with Disseminate, that target's Disseminate will refresh. The way to deal with these snakes is to have your raid stay in the small pocket and DPS the middle snake as hard as possible. If you have a bard or summoner in your group, their AoEs will be enough to damage the 2 smaller snakes low enough for the next part of this phase, so don't worry about focusing these targets just yet. 45 seconds after these snakes spawn, Twintania will dive bomb the raid 3 more times. Use the same strategy you used before to avoid these dive bombs and you'll be just fine. After Twintania finishes her dive bombs, 2 more Hygeia will spawn on the east side of the map. That means you'll have 4 Hygeia and 1 Asclepius to deal with. You will also only have 60 seconds from this point to finish them all off before Twintania returns. The easiest way to deal with these snakes is to get all the Hygeia to approximately 85% health and then use the DPS caster limit break. This will instantly kill all the small snakes and take a large chunk away from Asclepius' health. Not only that, but now you'll have all 4 stacks of Disseminate on Asclepius at the same time and you won't have to worry about refreshing before Twintania returns. Kill this snake quickly and then run and stack inside of a Neuralink to prepare for phase 4. Once the 60 seconds has elapsed, Twintania will return in an explosion and begin casting Etheric Perfusion immediately. Do not move from the Neuralink until Twintania has finished casting this skill. I highly recommend casting Virus on Twintania while she casts this to reduce the damage from Etheric Perfusion, which will hit for you approximately 7,000 to 9,000 damage unless you're inside of a Neuralink. Then it will only hit you for approximately 3,000 depending on Defense, Stone Skin, and Sucre. Directly after this explosion, phase 4 will begin, which is arguably the hardest phase of this entire fight. Twintania will still use Plummet and Death Sentence during this phase, and generally uses Plummet as soon as she finishes Etheric Perfusion, so be very careful. Thankfully, Twintania will no longer use Fireball or Conflag, but she'll gain 2 new abilities. The first one being Twister. I highly suggest you set a focus target for Twintania during this phase and place it somewhere easily seen, or you will more than likely cause your raid to wipe due to how fast Twintania casts this ability. Now, this ability will target 4 random party members and place an invisible landmine beneath their feet. Once Twintania finishes casting Twister, the landmine will appear anywhere along the path you took while she was channeling. This is extremely important to know because if you cross another person's path while Twister's channeling, you could potentially run over someone else's Twister and causing the landmine to explode, instantly killing you. Not only will this landmine explode, but it will also expand outward, pushing everyone nearby backwards a great distance and potentially throwing them into the fiery wall, which will also kill them instantly. If a Twister expands and hits another Twister, they will chain detonate, so be very careful of this. To avoid running into any Twisters, make sure you begin to move as soon as Twister is cast and never retrace your own steps or to cross another person's path. The next new mechanic of this phase is the Dread Knight. Approximately every 30 seconds, Twintania will call a Dread Knight down from the sky. This Dread Knight will always land in the center of the map. Shortly after, Twintania will cast the spell Unwoven Will, which will target a random player other than the 2 with the highest enmity, stunning them in place. At this time, the Dread Knight will charge towards the stunned player. If the Dread Knight is not killed before he reaches the player, he will instantly killing them with a move called Caber Toss. Should the Dread Knight still not die, Twintania will instantly choose a new target and cast Unwoven Will. This will cause the Dread Knight to charge at that new target and continue his killing spree until he dies. To deal with these Dread Knights, it's suggested that all of your ranged players stay at max distance from Twintania and from the center of the map. Not only that, but you should set up a stun rotation for the Dread Knight utilizing your Paladin's Shield Bash, as well as any other stuns you may have in your raid. The last way to handle these Dread Knights is to slow them. Both Miasma and Lethargy stack, so it should be very easy to kill the Dread Knights before it reaches the target. If you do not have either of these skills, your White Mage can spam Stone to slow the Dread Knight. The reason this phase is so difficult is because Twintania sometimes summons a Dread Knight and a Twister. This is even harder if you have multiple melee DPS in your raid. To help counter this mechanic, I highly suggest that everyone in the raid has Twintania as their focus target, so they're able to keep Twisters out of the Dreadnought's path and away from other players while they're DPSing it down. Now don't forget, Twintania will still be using Plummet and Death Sentence while Dread Knights are up, so keep an eye on that. Something my raid group does during the Twister Dreadnought phase is we always have the melee DPS use the limit break as soon as it's available, even if it's only 1 bar limit break, to push Twintania out of phase 4 as soon as possible. This phase will keep repeating with Twisters and Dread Knights until Twintania reaches approximately 30% health. At this time, her last piece of the collar will break off and create the 3rd and final Neuralink. It is suggested that with all 3 Neuralinks out, they create a triangle. For example, my raid places the first Neuralink from phase 1 in the north area of the map. Our second Neuralink from phase 2 is always dropped a little southwest from the first one. Basically a Neuralink to the north and to the south of where the first 3 snakes spawn in phase 3. And the final Neuralink we place in the middle of the map. This makes a triangle between all Neuralinks. The reason you do this is because during the final phase, or phase 5, these Neuralinks become one of the main mechanics of this fight. Once phase 5 begins, Twintania will lose the ability to cast Twister and to summon Dread Knights. However, she'll still be able to use Plummet and Death Sentence, as well as 2 new abilities. Her first new ability comes from phase 1, Liquid Hell, which will still target one random player, but instead of only casting 1 Liquid Hell at them, she'll instead cast 5 Liquid Hells back to back. This will happen every 20 seconds for the remainder of the fight, and each Liquid Hell will stay on the field for approximately 30 seconds. The easiest way to counter this mechanic is once you know you're the target of the Liquid Hell, begin to run around the outside of the arena until all 5 Liquid Hells have been cast. Make certain that you do not run through a Neuralink and place Liquid Hell on it, or you're going to have a major problem with her next new ability, Hatch. Hatch places an orb directly under Twintania's rear, which will grow in size. At the same time, a random player, other than the main tank, will be marked with 3 spiraling orbs. Once the orb grows to full size, it will move very quickly towards the marked target, exploding on contact, dealing approximately 8,000 damage to them, or anyone in the way of the orb. Be aware that Hatch has a small AoE, so it could kill multiple people if you're standing too close together. However, this damage can be vastly diminished by standing inside of a Neuralink when hit by this large orb. And instead of taking 8,000 damage, you'll only take approximately 1,500. The easiest way to deal with Hatch is by not moving Twintania at all once this phase starts, because Twintania drops a Neuralink in the exact location where Hatch spawns. By placing the off tank in this Neuralink, he will intercept every single Hatch and take minimal damage, making it much easier for everyone else to only have to worry about Liquid Hells. This may not always work because if the off tank or main tank is targeted by Liquid Hell, Twintania may have to be repositioned. This is why the rest of the party should be spread out around the other Neuralinks, and Liquid Hell should not be placed on top of these Neuralinks if at all possible. Do not forget that Hatch will explode on the first person it encounters, not just the one it's targeting, meaning if you are between the intended target and Twintania, you will die. This turn is a huge DPS check, and if you're unable to kill Twintania in 13 minutes, she will enrage, destroying all Neuralinks and instantly killing the entire raid. So if you're able to get past all these crazy mechanics and work as a team, turn 5 should go down in a matter of minutes. Well, I hope this has been helpful. I know turn 5 can be a huge struggle, especially if you don't have a set static, but if you follow everything I just explained here, you shouldn't have too many issues. This turn is all about team precision, so don't give up, and I hope I see you guys with your Allagan weapons soon. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, favorite, subscribe, and share for more Final Fantasy XIV content. Also, be sure to follow me on Facebook and Twitter where I post about upcoming content and answer all of your Final Fantasy XIV questions. As always, I'll see you guys next time.